In less than 18 months, nearly 700,000 jobs have disappeared across the United States. The reason? A trade war launched to protect America, but it has caused the most severe damage to American workers themselves. The 145% tariff earthquake. In April 2025, the 145% tariff on Chinese goods officially took effect. But the U.S. government did not stop there. It expanded tariffs to include the EU, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and South Korea. This was presented as a strategy to reset global trade and bring jobs back to America. But reality strayed far from the promise. Just weeks later, major U.S. companies, General Motors, Ford, and large retailers, began to slash profit forecasts, delay expansion, and cut jobs to stay afloat. In Columbus, Indiana, once hailed as a manufacturing success story, foreign orders dried up overnight. Factories cut hours, then closed permanently. The shield that became a burden. Tariffs drove raw material costs through the roof. U.S. industries dependent on imported parts from Asia and Europe, like steel, furniture, and electronics, were paralyzed. In Michigan, domestic steel prices spiked after foreign steel was hit with tariffs. Ironically, the very factories meant to be protected were crushed by rising costs. In Texas, furniture plants shut down, unable to compete globally. In California, the solar panel industry collapsed after raw material costs from Asia rose by over 40%. But no sector suffered more than agriculture. American farmers, from promised to abandoned following China's retaliation, contracts for soybeans, pork, and corn from the U.S. were canceled. China turned to Brazil, Mexico to Argentina, and U.S. agricultural goods had nowhere to go. The results were devastating. Soybeans rotted in storage. Farmers were forced to liquidate livestock at huge losses. Farm equipment was auctioned off at discount prices. According to USDA forecasts, U.S. farm income in 2025 could drop by over $40 billion, the biggest decline since the 1980 farm crisis. States like Iowa, Kentucky, and Wisconsin became ground zero for job losses. Rural towns fell into crisis, losing health insurance, defaulting on mortgages, and struggling to pay for schooling. The U.S. economy plunges as the world pivots while America isolated itself from global supply chains. Other nations moved quickly to adapt. China increased investments in Vietnam and Cambodia. The EU rerouted exports through the Middle East. South Korea relocated electronics manufacturing to Mexico and the U.S. Consumers felt the pressure immediately. New car prices rose by over $2,000. Electronics surged nearly 9% in 1 week, and monthly grocery bills climbed by 12% on average. This wasn't foreign retaliation. It was self-inflicted pain on working American families. According to Yale Budget Lab, these tariffs would cut U.S. GDP by nearly 1% and erase 700,000 jobs in 2 years. The Tax Foundation warned that household incomes could plummet, hitting low-income families the hardest. Broken trust and unanswered questions in Wisconsin, laid-off workers confronted campaign teams. In Arizona, truckers blamed canceled routes on surging costs, and in rural towns, silence from leadership became deafening. The damage wasn't just economic. It was a fracture in trust. The promise to bring jobs home had instead accelerated the flight of jobs abroad. In the end, one thing was clear. No one had won. Factories shut down. Workers were displaced. Industrial states fell into recession. A Bloomberg economist put it best. Imposing tariffs is like setting your house on fire to prove you own it. Without a strategic shift, these tariffs will only deepen the pain for the working-class communities that once believed in the dream of American manufacturing renewal.
I will not speak to the president's relationships with Jeff Bezos, but I will tell you that this is certainly a hostile and political action by Amazon.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them.
A new report from Punchbowl News says that Amazon is looking to avoid the blame for raising prices as a result of President Trump's new tariff.
But I imagine you do when it comes to tariffs.
We look at all the things that could impact consumers and customers.
$13 billion. Yes, you heard that right. Amazon had to restructure contracts worth $13 billion in just 60 days. Sounds crazy, right? But it's only the tip of the iceberg in this crushing tariff crisis. So, have you ever wondered why Amazon is slowly pulling out of the US market? And more importantly, how does this impact you, the everyday consumer? At the start of this year, tariffs on Chinese imports reached an astounding 145%. That's like America saying, if you want to sell here, you're going to pay through the nose. Because of this, Amazon had to restructure $13 billion worth of contracts in just 2 months. But then, in mid-May 2025, a surprising twist. The US and China agreed to cut tariffs down to 30%. From 145% to 30%. Quite a relief, right? But hold on, it's not that simple. The de minimis exemption, which allowed shipments under $800 to enter tariff-free, was removed. That means 85% of low-cost packages from China now face tariffs. The good news? The new tariffs on these small shipments were adjusted to a friendlier 54% or a flat $100 per package. So, some pressure eased, but small sellers and consumers still have to navigate these tricky waters. Imagine being a worker in Michigan or Ohio, states known for their industrial backbone, only to see your factory move to Vietnam, Malaysia, or Mexico. Why? Because it's cheaper there. In 2024, over 60% of new projects in electronics and consumer goods were launched in Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, US manufacturing jobs dropped about 3%. Big companies like UPS cut tens of thousands of positions. This is no rumor. The global supply chain is shifting dramatically, and American workers face serious challenges ahead. We all love a good deal, but have you noticed that the price of children's car seats jumped by $100? Electronics, clothes, and shoes from overseas are up by about 15% on average. Feeling the pinch yet? Yale Budget Labs says the average American is losing roughly $2,800 in purchasing power this year thanks to tariffs and inflation. The recent tariff cut to 30% might ease things. But is it enough? If shoppers start buying pricier American-made products instead, are we entering a whole new ballgame? Have you noticed that Chinese goods aren't coming directly into the US anymore? Instead, they're rerouted through ports in Mexico, Vietnam, or Malaysia. Shipments through Mexican ports have doubled. Meanwhile, major US ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach are jammed up, with container backlogs up 25%, a total logistics nightmare. With tariffs down to 30%, will this trend ease? Will Chinese goods flood back? That's a big question on everyone's mind. But the fallout is bigger than prices and jobs. The entire logistics system is strained. Over 10,000 US port workers have been laid off in just 6 months. Consumers face higher prices and fewer choices. Small businesses are scrambling to survive as costs soar and customers tighten their belts. This crisis is far from over. The ripple effects will impact the economy, jobs, and your everyday shopping for months, maybe even years to come. Did you know Walmart just announced a quarterly revenue of $165.6 billion? A staggering figure that leaves everyone amazed. But at the same time, prices at this retail giant are skyrocketing daily, making countless American families struggle to stretch every dollar. Imagine this. Tariffs on imported goods, especially from China, once reached a shocking 145%, more than doubling the product's value. Although now lowered to around 30%, the volatility and historically high tariff rates remain a significant burden for importers like Walmart. Walmart isn't a manufacturer. They gather goods worldwide. When facing such extra costs, the easiest way to balance the books is to raise prices for consumers. Groceries, household items, school supplies, none are spared. American families, especially low and middle-income groups, feel this price hike in every shopping trip and receipt. This decline in purchasing power causes people to skip non-essential products, spreading negative effects across the retail market and related services. No one enjoys paying more for essentials. Interestingly, despite Walmart's quarterly revenue topping $165 billion, their profits are shrinking significantly. Rising shipping costs and soaring import tariffs erode their already thin profit margins. Walmart cannot simply absorb all these costs without affecting operations. Holding prices low without adjustment could force cuts in investment, workforce, or service quality, all ultimately harming consumers. Therefore, Walmart publicly raises prices as both a business strategy and a transparent signal about the challenges they face. This sheds light on the broader struggles of major companies amid global economic uncertainties and constantly shifting trade policies. Beyond raising prices, Walmart is implementing profound changes in supply chains and operations. To reduce tariff costs, they are shifting sourcing to countries with lower tariffs like Vietnam, India, and Mexico, where production and import expenses are more manageable than China's current rates. Simultaneously, Walmart is pushing automation at warehouses and stores to boost efficiency and cut labor costs. However, this means fewer traditional jobs in American communities, especially where Walmart is a key employer. While saving costs, automation raises unemployment concerns, causing many families to lose stable incomes. In short, Walmart faces a tough choice between survival and profitability in a difficult market, but the price may be paid by American workers. This shift also demands new skills from workers, pushing the labor force toward technology-focused roles. Workers without access to training may find themselves left behind in this fast-changing environment. Local economies dependent on retail jobs may face increased instability and social challenges. At the same time, automation helps Walmart maintain competitive pricing in a volatile global market. Balancing cost-saving innovations with community welfare remains a critical challenge for the retail giant. The effects of price hikes and labor changes go beyond individuals to deeply affect communities, particularly in rural and suburban areas. Here, Walmart is not only a shopping hub, but a primary source of employment. Cutbacks in staffing reduce household incomes, weaken purchasing power, and trigger negative cycles like lower local tax revenue, which harms public services and social welfare. Moreover, as consumers spend more on necessities, they cut back on other expenses, decreasing revenue for many sectors and services in the economy. This creates a difficult cycle: rising prices, reduced spending, falling revenue in other industries, slower economic growth, fewer job opportunities. Amid America's ongoing recovery from the pandemic and inflation pressures, such Walmart changes could slow progress and add challenges for both citizens and policymakers. Did you know that tariffs imposed by the Trump administration caused Amazon to lose over $13 billion in profits over just 3 years? Yes, that number sounds shocking, doesn't it? But is it entirely accurate? And what really happened behind the scenes when this e-commerce giant decided to pull out of the United States? Tariffs can be a powerful tool to protect domestic manufacturing and reduce reliance on imports. However, when rates reach as high as 145% on Chinese goods, plus an additional 10% on many other products, it becomes a sharp blade that can cut into profits and raise prices for consumers. Amazon imports roughly 70% of its goods from China, so the rising costs hit them hard. And who ends up paying for that? Exactly, the consumers. Higher prices mean lower purchasing power, which negatively affects domestic consumption. Amazon even planned to disclose the price hikes caused by tariffs, aiming for transparency. But the White House opposed this move, forcing Amazon to keep it quiet. This shows the tension between protectionism and transparency in a market economy. Quite an irony, isn't it? Global supply chains are complex networks optimized for low costs and fast delivery. But high tariffs and new rules, like removing duty exemptions for low-value goods, have shattered that balance. Amazon lost a critical logistics advantage and had to act fast. Their bold move, called the Silver Compass Project, involved shifting global headquarters to places like UAE, Singapore, and Ireland. They're swimming out to deeper waters to preserve profits and remain competitive in a volatile trade policy environment. This shows that tariffs don't just raise prices, they reshape the global economic map as major players relocate to adapt. These shifts also mean jobs and investments are moving away from traditional hubs, creating new economic centers in regions with more favorable trade conditions. Amazon's strategy reflects a broader trend where companies seek stability and predictability amid trade tensions. This constant adaptation is now a necessity for survival in a world of uncertain policies. Ultimately, the global supply chain landscape is being redrawn, with long-lasting effects on international commerce. Seattle, once the booming home base of Amazon's growth, is now feeling the ripple effects. As news of Amazon's exit broke, its stock plunged. Housing demand dropped, dragging real estate values down. Small businesses dependent on Amazon employees' spending saw sales fall, facing closures or layoffs. Municipal tax revenues dropped, putting pressure on funding for infrastructure and public services. Thousands of workers now face uncertainty. They must decide whether to relocate or search for new jobs in a shifting market. It's a tough lesson on the risks of urban development relying too heavily on just a few corporate giants. Amazon is not alone in this struggle. Other giants like Apple, Tesla, and Walmart are also reassessing their supply chains and operations. To minimize tariff costs and maximize flexibility, the trend of moving production and headquarters overseas to benefit from tax breaks, modern infrastructure, and lower costs is becoming increasingly common. This shifts the balance of economic power between nations and presents a challenge for the U.S. to remain an attractive hub for global corporations. Amazon's exit offers a crucial lesson. High tariffs are not always the best answer. While aiming to protect domestic industries, excessive tariffs can increase production costs, weaken company competitiveness, and push business activities abroad. To retain major corporations and ensure sustainable growth, U.S. policymakers must strike a balance between protecting domestic interests and fostering a favorable business environment that encourages innovation and long-term investment. Adapting to globalization, diversifying supply chains, and enhancing competitiveness are key factors in maintaining the U.S.'s position as an economic leader. $514 billion. That's how much the U.S. Department of the Treasury was forced to borrow in Q2 2025 to cover the massive gap caused by China's dumping of $1.7 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. And what's even more alarming? The U.S. dollar lost nearly 9% of its value immediately after that retreat. China's shocking counterstrike. Overnight, what once seemed unthinkable became reality. China didn't just pull out of the U.S. bond market, it did so at lightning speed. Roughly $1.7 trillion in Treasury bonds were dumped in quick succession. This came immediately after the U.S. government ordered banking giants, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, to withdraw from a $5 billion IPO of a leading Chinese EV battery company. The reason? National security concerns and Beijing's rapid rise in strategic technology. But the price? Too high. In just one quarter, the Treasury Department had to boost its borrowing plan to a record $514 billion, more than 4 times the original forecast. This is no longer a story of two economies. It's a full-fledged financial war. The domino effect, dollar drops, interest rates. Surged China's sudden exit from the bond market sent U.S. Treasury yields soaring, which in turn drove up borrowing costs across the board. Whether buying a house, a car, or paying tuition, Americans are now paying the highest interest rates in years. And the impact? Inflation hit 3.4% in Q1 2025, up 1.2 percentage points from the previous quarter. Rising energy and food prices are eroding the earnings of millions of households, especially low and middle-income families. Consumer confidence plunged to its lowest level since 1952, a glaring sign that fear is spreading about America's economic future. Global investors flee. It wasn't just China. Japan, Germany, and Saudi Arabia also began unloading U.S. bonds simultaneously. In total, $317 billion in U.S. assets were pulled out in just Q1, marking the largest dump since 2016. Meanwhile, Asian IPOs in the U.S. took a nosedive. The percentage of Asian firms choosing to list in the U.S. dropped from 75% to just 28% over the past 3 years. This doesn't only affect foreign firms. It undermines the global appeal of America's capital markets. At the same time, the U.S. Congress ordered giant investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard to divest $812 billion from over 220 Chinese companies, fueling a growing sense of financial instability. China and BRICS restructure the global financial system. As the U.S. uses financial tools to exert pressure, China isn't sitting idle. Beijing has accelerated its de-dollarization strategy through several bold moves, reducing its U.S. bond holdings to $759 billion, the lowest in 9 years. Boosting its gold reserves to 2,292 tons, equivalent to 6.5% of its total FX reserves. investing more in BRICS internal bonds and yuan-denominated assets. But that's not all. China announced it would launch its own national credit rating system by 2026, aimed at breaking away from Western agencies like Moody's and Fitch. Simultaneously, the BRICS alliance is expanding its payment system, BRICS Pay, enabling cross-border trade in local currencies. In just Q1 2025, it processed $56.4 billion in transactions, with nearly half conducted. Will the U.S. revise its policies? Will it dial back financial weaponization to keep allies close? Or will it double down, while the rest of the world quietly shifts toward a new financial order where the dollar is no longer central? The answer won't come from fiery speeches. It will be revealed through real policies, interest rate decisions, investment rules, and how America handles its strategic partners. Because every passing minute, every signal sent, is another dollar, another job, another American savings account being wagered in this unprecedented financial conflict. 5.2% unemployment in major cities, 84% of GDP in public debt, and a slew of important economic data has disappeared. The world's second-largest economy is facing unprecedented warning signs, with key indicators showing a sharp decline. China's economy on the brink. China's economy is undergoing a severe recession, experiencing a level of decline not seen in the past decade. While it remains the world's second-largest economy, the signs of weakening are increasingly evident. Unemployment in major cities reached 5.2% in March 2025, up from 5.4% in February 2025. This rise in unemployment reflects the downturn in the manufacturing and services sectors. Particularly hard hit are the youth, with many unable to find stable employment. Factory closures have become a common phenomenon, especially in the southern regions where many factories depend on exports. This reduces production capacity and affects economic growth. However, what worries analysts is not the disappointing data, but the absence of data. The Chinese government has stopped publishing several key indicators, making it impossible for the world and investors to accurately assess the real situation. Hiding this information only increases suspicion about the true health of the economy. Economic data disappears. Since the beginning of 2025, China has stopped publishing several key indicators such as urban land sales, youth unemployment, foreign investment business confidence, soy sauce production. Why hide these numbers? The answer likely lies in public debt, which is approaching 84% of GDP by 2025. The large increase in public debt will directly affect the country's financial stability and erode confidence in the economy. Moreover, China's real estate market is crashing, affecting both government and corporate debt. Hiding these numbers might be aimed at preventing panic, especially as these factors are contributing to the country's economic difficulties. Negotiations. Why did China change its stance? Initially, China declared that it would not engage in trade negotiations unless the U.S. removed all tariffs. However, by April 2025, this stance had completely changed. The reason lies in the fact that GDP grew only by 5.4% in Q1 2025, lower than expected. This weak growth shows that China's economy is facing significant difficulties. At the same time, consumer spending sharply declined, leading to major trade zones like Shenzhen turning into ghost towns, with a noticeable drop in shopping and production activity. As a result, China was forced to change its strategy and reopen negotiations with the U.S. in order to alleviate pressure both from within its economy and the negative impacts of the trade war. At this point, China had no choice but to try to reach an agreement to maintain economic stability. Avoiding tariffs via detours. Despite high tariffs, Chinese goods are still entering the U.S. through unofficial channels. Some exporters have chosen routes such as China, Malaysia, U.S., or China, Vietnam, U.S. According to Reuters, the volume of goods passing through Malaysia in 2024 increased by more than 50% compared to 2023. This situation has dragged transit countries into the vortex of trade tensions, even though they are not directly involved. Is the U.S. consumer mindset being manipulated? On one hand, it's goods. On the other, it's media. TikTok, a popular app in the U.S., is becoming an indirect tool for influencing consumer behavior. The Shopping in China campaign was heavily promoted in 2024. According to the NCRI Research Center, 70% of videos related to Chinese products are boosted by the algorithm. videos promoting affordable housing in China, quality goods at low prices. But in reality, an apartment in Shenzhen can cost up to $460,000, while 600 million Chinese people earn less than $5 per day. $1,277. That's how much each American household had to pay more every year, all because of tariffs. Not China, not Europe. It's the American people who are carrying the burden of a trade war launched by no one else but the White House. A threat sent to 150 countries. Not an invitation, not a bilateral deal, but 150 letters of threat with one clear message. Want to do business with America? Pay up. The latest announcement from the 47th president was a political shockwave, but in reality, it was a failed bluff. No specific country named, no foreign leader confirmed, no agreement signed, just Scott and Howard sending letters. This is not how global trade works, and the world knows that, because no letter can replace negotiation, agreements, or the rules of the World Trade Organization. What Trump called a negotiation tactic was really just a glorified collection notice. Americans are the ones paying the price. When countries pay to do business with the U.S., sounds tough, but it's completely false. When America imposes import tariffs, the ones paying are American businesses, Walmart, Target, and ultimately the average U.S. consumer. According to the Tax Foundation, Trump's earlier tariffs cost each household an average of $1,277 per year. And that was just the beginning. At Walmart, prices for microwaves, socks, vacuum cleaners rose 5 to 15%. Target warned that price hikes were unavoidable. Small retailers, lacking scale, couldn't survive. Many closed permanently. Tariffs became a hidden tax. Not on paper, but eating away at every dollar in people's wallets. The illusion of 90 trade deals in 90 days. Trump claimed he'd sign 90 trade deals in 90 days. But what happened? Only one framework deal, and with the United Kingdom, a country that makes up just 3% of U.S. trade, and even that deal had no legal value. The last line of the document stated, "This does not constitute a legally binding agreement." No China, no Europe, no confirmed partners. U.S. businesses were left confused. Markets were in turmoil, and foreign countries, they waited. They knew this was just another repeated bluff. China, the EU, Canada. Instead of giving in, they formed new alliances, excluding America from the game. History repeats, and the cost of living in illusion. In 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Act raised import tariffs to protect U.S. agriculture and industry. The result? A global economic crisis. Exports plunged, businesses collapsed, farmers went bankrupt, jobs vanished, and the world hit back with retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. Now, that same story is playing out again. Under Trump, the total import tariff rate soared to 38%, including 30% newly imposed and 8% inherited. A massive burden on every baby dress, computer, and imported can of milk. No nation has been hit harder than ordinary Americans. Because while politicians gave speeches on stage, people in grocery stores paid the price with their everyday lives. A predictable strategy and an unchanging outcome. Economists, even conservative ones, warned, tariffs don't win leverage, they paralyze the economy. Gary Cohn, Trump's former economic advisor, admitted, Trump didn't understand how tariffs work. He thought other countries would pay. But it's Americans who paid the most. The outcome? Trust in the U.S. declined. Rivals like China, India, and the EU signed trade deals without the U.S. American businesses. When history becomes a warning sign, Smoot-Hawley in 1930 and today's tariffs share one root: policies driven by fear, not data. Both were based on a nostalgic dream of a great America, where manufacturing reigned, where farmers were at the center. But today, only 1% of Americans work in agriculture, and over 80% of the economy is services. We're taxing the entire economy to protect a tiny sliver of the labor force, when what we really need is investment in the future, innovation, automation, and global cooperation.